Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. How you doing today? Michael Zuber, one rental at a time. And yes, we are recording this on Saturday, so you have it on Monday because Greg is taking his youngest to college. That is dedication, folks. Those are what my experts are all about. So thank you very much for doing this again.
Yeah. Glad to be here. And this is always a good discussion, always a good time. And yeah, I didn't know where I would be Monday and if I'd be able to pull over and do the mobile interview. So I said, you know what, we better knock this out over the weekend.
I appreciate it, man. Well, one thing I want to talk about is the Fed. I think we have seen, I don't know, a noticeable change in the rhetoric around Fed watchers, if you will. I think if you go back a couple of months, all of them were like, hey, everything's good. They got to keep their hammer down. The economy's not out of it yet. But I've noticed a pretty stark change where, taper talk has certainly ratcheted up. And again, I'm still I'm still saying that we're going to have our first rate rise in 2022, not 2023. But what are you hearing around the Fed? Because you talked to lots of people. What's going on there?
Yeah, they're starting to split into a couple of different camps now, and there are more of them now saying we need to do something and we need to do something now versus before. But the two or three main characters, Jay Powell and a couple of the other of the main members still are not indicating that anything needs to be done. And I think one, they're waiting for unemployment benefits to expire to see what employment looks like. We're gaining ground there. And of course, their first and most important mandate is full employment. People forget what the Fed is supposed to do: full employment and inflation, right? Those are their two mandates. Now they've gotten into everything else. They're the biggest buyer in the world of whatever else junk people don't want that's overpriced. So
yeah, exactly.
But what's interesting is more people on the Fed are coming out and saying, look, we need to put the foot on the brakes. We need to stop, at a very minimum, the mortgage-backed security purchase. We need to just stop it. Number two, bonds. We need to stop that because that's killing bond yields, right? That's just driving those yields down because the Fed's just buying them up.
Yeah.
Number three, you're starting to see Wall Street now come out and say, we need to do something. This is becoming a problem, record highs every day. It's just getting silly. And, our conversation last week, I did a little research to read up on the savings and loan crisis and what caused that. And that wasn't that huge. I mean, it was a few $100 billion, something like that, all in all. But back then it was probably a bigger deal than it would be now. I mean, the Fed's buying $100 billion worth of, MBS every month, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But anyways, what created that was the Fed. I guess it was Ronald Reagan had put some laws into effect that allowed banks essentially to do whatever they want, lever up however the savings and loans to lever up however they wanted, and to be able to do some things from a risk-on basis that otherwise would not be allowed, which created a lot of over-exuberant speculation and fraud. So what we're seeing in the markets now is kind of the same thing all across the board. Every asset you can think of is a result of what the Fed's been doing and what they've been pumping out there. And what people are starting to realize is there's no easy way to unwind this. That it's not going to end well because they're going to have to stop at some point, and they need to stop now sooner than, and gradually ease into it and just start pulling the Band-Aids off versus later when it will be an economic tsunami like we've probably never seen.
Yeah, this is becoming a problem. The last 2 days of the week, I believe the reverse repo market was once again over $1 trillion. You could think basically cash sitting there getting paid something like 0.015% or something of that nature. I think it's actually 0.0015, right? It's barely above zero. But that just all goes back to Jamie Dimon's thoughts about, hey, I'm just going to start building cash. Everything is inflated. Everything is overpriced. And sure, we have inflation. And frankly, what people don't really realize, at least in my opinion, I think rates are already negative, right? If real inflation is at 5% and rates are at 2%, that's a -3. Right. So we have
inflation's over 10%. When you factor in the rise in housing costs, rents that have gone up, other costs of ownership of housing, not your payments because interest rates are so low, but everything else, fuel. I mean, you name it. I mean, everything is up, and those aren't the transitory things like lumber and, a little bit of airline tickets for travel and things like that. I mean, real inflation is here and it's here to stay. You have taxes That's real inflation. Inflation is a tax. So yeah, we're probably north of 10% realized inflation at the consumer level.
Yeah, I think we're 7, 8, 9% for sure. But I also think it builds from here. Unlike Powell, who thinks it kind of rolls over. I think that rental inflation that you were talking about, that's the thing that's simmering under it's like a boiling pot to me. It's like it's getting hot and you got these little bubbles, but soon it's just going to be, it's going to be
you've got
messy.
this infrastructure package coming out. And again,
yeah, more
you're
money.
bringing this out at a time when everything is already at record levels. So what is that going to do? They're not looking at that and saying, man, how's this going to affect inflation?
Jesus.
So if you think about, again, what is it, $2 trillion or however much?
3.5.
3.5 trillion. So only a couple hundred billion is actually going into real infrastructure. The rest of it's just junk, just pork spending, junk, roads, bridges, infrastructure. There's probably only about 200-300 billion actually going into that. But that's going to drive up building material costs and, could put pressure on labor and things like that. I mean, you can't even institute that package right now because there's not enough people out there to do the work.
Yeah.
And you can't get the materials quick enough, but that's going to drive inflation there. And none of it is actually doing what it should really actually be doing, which is to help the consumers, to help the average people. It's going into, Wall Street, corporations, things like that. I mean, none of it is going to actually do what it's intended to do, except create more inflation at the asset level. I mean, huge.
Yeah, all of this spending. And again, I did some math earlier. I think we spent about $8 trillion already, or 7.5, something like that, which, oh, by the way, is about $62,000 per family unit. I mean, that's just unfathomable. And oh, by the way, with another 1 trillion and then 3.5 trillion, we're talking about another 42. It's like $90,000 if everything goes through and gets spent per family.
You want to stimulate the economy and spur on recovery, take that money and give it to everybody who, is below the income level of, whatever you want to choose.
Just mail them a check, man.
Right.
Just be done with it.
That's $60,000. Forget anybody who's over, 200,000-300,000 a year. Anybody who's under 100 grand a year per household, mail them $60,000 to $100,000 a year and watch what happens to the economy. Boom, we're off to the races. Yeah. Put $200 billion into infrastructure. You think that's going to make a dent in the economic recovery?
It'll make a couple of companies really rich. But it'll de-stress, or it'll stress everything. Labor will become a problem and be competing for labor. Forget cement and, copper and all these other components. It's already tight, and it's going to get worse.
And it's funny because I'm a capitalist, free market entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
But what I know is wrong about this whole situation and creating more disparity of income inequality is that all of the businesses that were put out of business from the pandemic, not that they didn't do anything. Yeah. Okay, they're out. They can't get zero interest money to rebuild and to stay open and work like Wall Street's getting with all of this money to be able to speculate in the stock market. So to me, that ticks me off because I'm an entrepreneur. I've built companies and I've been there when I was trying to borrow money and I couldn't get it.
Yeah.
And I'm watching all these big companies like, MicroStrategy that can lever his company to buy Bitcoin. I mean, that's ridiculous. That you're able to do something like that. And the average American that's in a restaurant or a, retail store or a barbershop that can't get a loan, to keep themselves alive until we get to the other side of this thing. To me, that's where, you've got a big problem with what they've tried to do to spur the economy. And, that's nothing to say against Bitcoin or anything like that. I'm just saying, that's a highly speculative asset that, has no real tangible security behind it. It's completely speculative. And the only reason they're able to do that is because all the money's coming from what the Fed's pumping out there.
Yeah. Yeah, this is just an example we talked about a year ago. It's the K-shaped recovery, right? If you're lucky enough to be in the top of the K, you are better off today than you were a year ago. And if you're in the bottom shape of the K, you are unfortunately in much, much worse shape. And that happens too often in our economy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I think the Fed's got to stop. I think the Fed has to taper this year. And I think the Fed will raise rates next year. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. Everybody, more and more people, when you have the Wall Street bankers coming out saying, dude, enough,
stop.
When the banks are telling you no more, You got to do something. And that's why the reverse repo market is so crazy, because the banks have too much money and they have
Yeah.
nothing to do with it.
Yeah. Crazy. And again, do you think we get our first rate increase sometime, maybe summer of next year?
I still think we might see something. Well, yeah, at this point, I don't know, because it depends on the Delta variant and what the effect on the economy is there.
Yeah.
If that wasn't a factor, I think they would have had to do it this year. But yeah,
It's going to be
based on
next
this,
year.
what it does, it's probably going to come sometime next year.
Yeah. Maybe April to June, somewhere in there, maybe.
Yeah, now all cards are, who knows? Everything's up in the air with this Delta variant, what it really does to the economy here in the country.
Yeah. Powell's not doing anything this year with actual rate increases, because he's just going to keep pointing at that. But he's got to stop. He's got to take his foot off the bond market, at least cut it in half.
Yeah, they're going to taper. They've already started tapering back. I think they've dropped it to 50 billion in MBS purchases. So they've already started that. Bond purchases, I think they're going to start tapering that after their next meeting. They'll probably say, here's what we're going to do, and show the taper process. Interest rates, I think, are completely off the table until we get, unemployment benefits are done and we know what the real employment situation looks like. We know what this pandemic's going to look like and how that's going to affect the economy and things like that. So I don't think there's going to be any real interest rate talk until those things happen, but
yeah,
the tapering will start.
Yeah, I agree. Well, again, thank you so much for doing this with me Saturday morning. These will be loaded Monday. I look forward to topic number 3. Thank you very much.